Kevin, you've been on the job for about 6 months now as an assistant county manager here at Clark County. Before that, you spent some 17 years in Washoe County, including the last 3 as the assistant county manager up in the Reno area. Compare and contrast the major differences between the 2 largest counties in Nevada.
I think, in my world up north, I was in the social services realm, human services realm. In that area, I think there's a lot of similarities. It's just much bigger here, more volume. So I think it's more of a challenge. But I think from an overall county management perspective, I think one of the key contrasts that I see is just the mere size of the organization. Public service, dedicated employees across all levels, I see that really clearly. But I think when I look at the 2 and I come here, I'm obviously in a much bigger pond in terms of that. And so the other piece I would say is because it's a bigger pond, developing those relationships and those partnerships to really effectuate change and continue public service for everybody that's here.
And as assistant county manager, you handle 7 or 8 departments here. One is social services, which obviously fits your background. You were director of social services up in Washoe County, and you also implemented a number of innovative programs there. Talk about some of your successes.
Yeah, so I had a couple good experiences when I was in child welfare as a director. Up north, it's structured a little different, but I had social service and child welfare, Department of Family Services, and some of the programs, obviously I was involved in integration of child welfare back in the late 90s. So I got to learn a lot there. But then as I kind of evolved, we hit the recession about the time I became a director. So one of the key issues I had to do was look at program change related to the recession. So the recession really allowed for the breaking down of a lot of silos because people didn't have funding. So I was able to utilize government funding and private partnerships to really I developed a Crossroads program, which was really tied to indigent services. Really looking at serial inebriates or frequent flyers within the system. So some of those clients are costing $250,000 to $350,000 a year between incarceration, medical costs, community response, law enforcement, and set up a program that now has about 160. And then on the child welfare side, really trying to do the similar process in terms of how do you do outreach, how do you do diversion within delivery of those services, and just there is no finish line. It's that constant proactive outreach. And I think up north, I was able to establish some of that programming, which really led to diversion, going from more restrictive to less restrictive in terms of those service components, both to save $1, but also, and more importantly, to improve lives. And I think that was one of the key pieces that I had up north, and that's part of the reason I came down here. Is it's a huge opportunity to look at how we can develop programming across the human services spectrum. So really from birth to death, whether it's a child in the child welfare system or whether it's a senior or a vulnerable adult.
Obviously, within the first few months you came here, you came and within October 1, which was one of the grimmest days, obviously, in our country's history, and the Vegas Strong Resiliency Center was something that the county and many other agencies and social services department, obviously, are taking the forefront. Talk a little bit about that center.
So, honestly, when I came to Clark County, did not obviously expect anything like that or of that magnitude. My experience up north, I dealt with a lot of natural disasters, both as a social services director and then also as an assistant county manager. So a lot of floods, a lot of fires, a lot of organizational response tied to that and training. With October 1, kind of timing is everything, but with October 1, I was pretty new on the job and kind of thrust into that more in a natural process, just from my social services back to my emergency response perspective. But it hasn't happened anywhere to this degree. So the Resiliency Center, the scope of services, you're discussing issues and developing processes with federal consultants from Department of Justice, and then you're down at the line level trying to figure out how do we help people. And so the October 1 incident, as horrific as it was, it also created more on my side an opportunity. I had to get thrust into meeting a lot of community providers and a lot of leadership across the county that does a wonderful job. But I also see that as opportunity to develop continued partnerships for other service continuums, both tied to October 1, how we expand and do what we need to do for all those that were impacted, because we have a dedicated process for recovery. This isn't a short-term issue, as you know. It's a 3-year process at a minimum, and then how do we move that forward? But at the same time, also looking at how it crosses over in, again, back to human services. How do we develop those partnerships so we can improve people's lives?
One of the agencies that obviously has been very much involved in that and everything throughout the 1 October tragedy, and one of the departments that you are oversee is the Coroner Medical Examiner's Office. Talk a little bit about Coroner John Fudenberg's office and what you've seen from the professionalism of their staff.
So, in looking at the coroner's office, and it's interesting, I had a dialogue with the coroner when I first got here, just in our orientation meeting. We talked about emergency response and disasters, with obviously no inclination of what was coming. But I will say, because I had the coroner office up north in Washoe County and now I'm down here, I can say John really runs a lean machine in terms of his staffing, in terms of his structure and his sheer volume. That's one thing that I will say. If you compared the north to the south, when I look at the volume, it's not even in the same ballpark. So I've had a learning process there. But tied to October 1, it really has just been a non-stop, really since October 1, of both workload tied to his department, but then also a focus on the coroner's office. When you're dealing with this, and then you're dealing with people's lives, you're dealing with grief, you're dealing with loss. One of the things I really want to comment on is the dedication of that staff and the impact to the staff. And John's involved in our recovery process and how we support our employees and everybody impacted by it. Often we think on the victim side, but the other side of that is everybody that responded and is part of that. The coroner's office is a piece of that. And it's been a massive workload, whether it's related to a public relations side in terms of being a focus, but also doing day-to-day work. Because what people sometimes forget in the process is with October 1, we have lots of dedicated staff from the coroner's office and our other departments that are working on the recovery and the resiliency, but day-to-day work doesn't stop. So that's the other component that I think in management departments is trying to figure out, how do I make their life easier in trying to do that, and how do we continue to manage. And it really has been a day-to-day since October 1 to make sure that we do business as usual to some degree as best you can, while we're also trying to meet the needs and the demands of this horrific event.
Clark County also oversees family services here, which might be one of the most important duties I think we do. Talk a little bit about that department, what you've seen there through adoptions, fostering, and any other thing, the services that department does.
So I always say in the world of child welfare and Department of Family Services, it's a really hard job. And I can tell you, since I've been there, there's hardworking staff. When I look at the department, I've spent a lot of time at the different sites and the locations. You have a department of over 800 people that are all really hardworking people and do a great job. I think the other issue tied to the system is there is no finish line. So we're always trying to figure out, how do we improve our system? How do we work within our system so that we can provide the services, the safety net and the spectrum? That community partnership, I think, is a really critical component to that. But on the staff side, I think it's also tied to looking at that continuous improvement. And so, and I've been doing this, going on close to 25 years. And I can tell you in the world of child welfare, I often refer to it as kind of dog years, in terms of a year in child welfare is like 3 years in something else. It's really hard. And I think that is a responsibility. My leadership here and why I came here was really to step into that, just to try to continue to move that forward with the hardworking staff in the department.
Something completely different, the Clark County Shooting Complex, one of the best in the country, and I know you've been out there and shot. I don't know if you know this, Steve Carmichael, he's in the Trap Shooting Hall of Fame, and he said you're an excellent shot. So it's taken a while for the community to catch on to this in the shooting complex. Give us the status of the shooting complex and where you'd like to see that in the future.
So my perspective on the shooting complex, when I came down here for the job, I was interested in the shooting complex only because I do like to shoot, trap, and skeet as a sport. And one of the interesting components is it's really a state-of-the-art facility. It's very exciting and fun to me to be a part of that. In terms of the future and in terms of where it goes, it's fairly new when you look at it in the longevity of the county. But I do think there's some opportunity tied to the center related to its size and its potential related to international trap and skeet. So one of the things that we've also talked about is possibilities of how do you utilize that current park and its current structure to both enhance tourism for those that are avid shooters, and then also look at how it can enhance the revenue for self-sustaining revenue tied to the facility and its longevity. Because of its sheer size and because of the number of visitors we see coming to Clark County, I think there's a huge nexus on an international market also. that is still being tapped into.
All right, we appreciate you spending some time with us, and we'll let you get back to work. Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you.